Ladies and gentlemen, coming soon, a podcast you've all been waiting for. The Movie Podcast to end all movie podcasts. A podcast that discusses and critiques the best of the best and the worst of the worst movies playing at a theater near you. With a host whose opinions have been deemed as fact by your favorite fact checkers. And that's a fact. Without further ado, let me introduce you to the movie maestro, the tyrant of theater, the gumshoe of review, the man that makes theater employees and Hollywood execs shiver by his mere presence. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge, the jury, the sultan of cinema, Justin Henson. Welcome to the Movie Wire.
And welcome to this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I'm your host, Justin Henson, and welcome to the show. We have a big show this week with 3 brand new reviews, with 2 movies in theaters and 1 now available to stream. This includes an early review. This week on the show, everything you feel is under the surface in Night Swim. The flight of a rugby team crashes on a glacier in the Andes. The few passengers who survive the crash find themselves in one of the world's toughest environments to survive in the Netflix original, Society of Snow. And finally, change is here and election season is a bloodbath in this early review of Founders Day, which releases in theaters January 19th. We've got a lot to cover this week, so let's jump right in. Ready for my verdict? Let's get into it.
Out of the windows, what? A roar and a burst of flame. The Movie Wire podcast. With just you need people like me. The podcast for hot and trending movies. The Wire.
And here we go.
A small town is shaken by a series of anonymous killings in the days leading up to a heated election. In this early review of Founders Day.
You know you don't have to go. Princeton's supposed to be.
Hey! You looking first?
Things are really heating up in the race for mayor. We're just days away from going to the polls.
Which is actually the reason for this weekend's celebration, the Tricentennial.
A town festival with a mass killer running around.
Whoever it is just getting showy. That's how these guys start to trip up.
I know there's a lot of speculation. I know there's a lot of rumors going around.
What happened that night?
Let's all stay close to home. Don't let your children out. Stay safe.
Show starts in 1 minute.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a...
Many of you have asked why we are moving ahead with today's festivities. In light of the recent tragedy, in these especially difficult times, Founders Day...
Don't you dare lecture me about Founders Day. Give us a little time.
5 people are dead. 5 people!
Get away from him right now! Right now! He's dangerous!
Founders Day. Man, how can we tell that we are really squeezing ideas out of the slasher genre? We have had horror movies about Thanksgiving, Christmas, Halloween, of course, Valentine's Day, Independence Day, but we have yet to have a mass killer on Founders Day. Pop quiz to anybody listening. When is Founders Day? I'll wait. Those of you that don't remember, neither do I. But one thing's for sure, I will never forget the day I watched Founders Day. January 1st, New Year's Day, 2024. The day I saw one of the worst slasher films of my time. This is the first movie of 2024 that I watched, and I can safely say that this is the worst film already of 2024. But on a positive note, it can't get much worse than this. Now, let me put some context around this before I get into my review. There are slasher films that follow a formula that add some fun factor. There are slasher films so bad that they're good. There are some slasher films that at least attempt to give some jump scares, even though poorly executed. There are slasher films with horrible slashers but decent characters, and the other way around. I can go on. Usually I consider slasher films to be a genre on their own, and I don't mind turning my brain off to just sit back, relax, and watch dumb characters run from costume killers. I can usually find something positive about some slasher films. But when it comes to Founders Day, good God, about the 60-minute mark into about an hour and 45-minute runtime, after giving this movie a shot, I couldn't hold my frustration anymore. I picked up my notepad from my lap and wrote the last note I would write for the remainder of the runtime, which was, I want to take a visit to the concession stand, ask for a cup of butter, smear it in my eye so I can go blind. This is the absolute worst piece of shit I have seen in a theater since I could remember. Mind you, I had entered the theater's restroom prior with an unflushed toilet. And then I quietly and subtly tucked my notepad away, never to be seen again during this movie. I put my notepad away because if the movie wasn't going to put in any effort, neither was I. I placed my chin into the palm of my hand and I just waited for this movie to be over, like I'm a child waiting to get out of timeout. Now the plot is very simplistic for Founders Day. A red masked killer kills people on Founders Day, holding a judge's gavel. Why? It doesn't matter. And even when the climax explains it, it still doesn't matter. Founders Day starts off with an intriguing 5 minutes with a small town's election coming up and protesters arguing across the street about each other's candidate. This did pique my attention to what they were going to do with this premise. But then the movie does absolutely nothing with it. It introduces an idea with so many possibilities of political commentary, but instead, it decides to stitch together ideas and twists from other movies that they don't even really try to hide. Now, without giving anything away, God help you if you see this movie, but the ending will remind you of Scream, especially with our antagonist losing his mask and sporting just a black robe as we see in all the Scream movies. The kill scenes are completely laughable, and not the good kind of laughable, not the so bad it's good kind, not the intentionally so cheesy it's fun kind, but they are just lazy with a lack to attention to detail to make it so bad it's funny, or just really make it overly gory. The kill scenes add nothing to the table. They're not really gory, there's no attention to detail, they're not fun, they're not scary. It's just completely fucking lazy, with no sort of direction or vision. Now, I have seen a lot of our writer-director Eric Blomquist's work, and even though he has a pattern of small-budget horror movies, there are moments I could pick through that had some fun elements. In season 1 of this show, I reviewed Eric Blomquist's movie, She Came from the Woods, which at least had some fun, colorful characters that kept the movie moving at a swift pace. But here we have one decent performance, and that's our main character, Allison, played by Naomi Grace. Grace's performance is pretty by the book, but there's not much here to work with when it comes to dialogue, so I'm not going to fault her for that. She does what she can, and it's a decent performance, because the dialogue here is absolutely dreadful, and just plain sucks. Walking into this movie, the main thing I was looking forward to is seeing William Russ, who some might know from the dad from Boy Meets World, who plays our teenager's teacher, Mr. Jackson, whose on-screen likability is there, but his performance is not. The performance almost borders obnoxious, where with every line Russ delivers, he has to start it with, or end it with, or even sometimes both, beginning and end of the lines. It becomes distracting and annoying. The main problem Founders Day has is that it sets up multiple conflicts, from political to parents to kids to relationships to friendships. It always starts a conflict but never really spends time to discover it, solve it, or bring it up again. We have a conflict and then it's never heard from again. These conflicts just kind of go away and we are just asked to not care about it. If you want to be a silly slasher movie, Be a silly slasher movie. Don't insert potential conflicts just to sound smarter because it looks good on paper. If you're gonna put it in, address the damn thing. And then when we finally get to the climax, writers Eric and Carson Bloomquist attempt to add a twist at the end that I didn't give a flying fuck about. Because with all the added non-addressed conflicts, our writers and director think they are more clever than what they are, and attempt to give us a twist that again is recycled. And even though I didn't expect much from the ending, this ending knew exactly how to piss me off in the right way, mainly because it treats the viewer like we are complete morons. When in contrary, the movie's dialogue is completely moronic and lazy. They should have just called this Lazy Day instead of Founders Day, and at least I would have set an expectation to the viewer and it would have made sense. Even our villain's costume is nothing more than a bathrobe, wig, and mask, probably bought at Spirit Halloween 2 months ago, because that's how long this fucking trash of a project probably took to make start to finish. And there is nothing scary or unique about this costume, but yet they slap this generic character on the movie poster and think they have horror gold. The movie adds a couple of characters to make it seem like it's trying to be goofy, but even that isn't consistent. The Bloomquists have no idea what kind of movie they wanted to make. It's not gory, it's not fun, it's not scary. It drags on 45 minutes longer than it needed to. If the movie wanted to have a really good twist for this film, just put a frame that says the end at the 60-minute mark. I'm sure you would get a bigger applause from the audience versus boos at the end. Founders Day was so bad I almost didn't review it on this show, but decided since this is a very early review, I can at least give fair warning. So let me break it down. The story sucks, the characters suck, the editing sucks, the villain really fucking sucks, and the payoff is the laziest piece of shit fucking writing and directing I have encountered in recent memory. To the point I felt like this was like sitting through a cinematic Amway presentation. You know it's a con, and it sucks really bad, but it still got your money. I'm giving Founders Day no stars.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby.
Now, before we get into the rest of the show, make sure to check out my reviews for movies that just became available to rent, buy, or stream now.
Now available on video cassette.
Everybody is dreaming about Nicolas Cage and Dream Scenario. That knew exactly how to play with my emotions to dream up 3 stars. The holidays are over, but The Holdovers is a movie that is a gift that just keeps giving, and now is a 2-time Golden Globe winner. The Holdovers is one of the best films of the year, receiving 4 stars. An intimate look into the relationship between Priscilla and Elvis in Priscilla, which wasn't all hunka Bernie love in their relationship, but the movie I couldn't help falling in love with, receiving 3.5 stars. Everybody hungers for something in the Hunger Games prequel in Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, which made me hungry for more, receiving 3 stars. There are some new trolls on the block, and it's triple the trolls, triple the music, and triple the annoyance in Trolls Band Together, which received 1.5 stars. There will be no leftovers in Eli Roth's Thanksgiving, which made me thankful for finally a watchable holiday horror movie this year, receiving 3 stars. And finally, action speaks louder than words in John Woo's holiday action film, Silent Night, which was more of a punishment than coal in my stocking, receiving 1.5 stars. You can check out those reviews on previous episodes, and while you do, don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Now, before we get into the last set of reviews, there is a podcast that's become my mental work break tradition. Whenever work stresses me out, I always go to my favorite fuckers, and that's J and K over the Fuck My Work Life podcast. The link to their show will be in the description of this episode. Let's hear from J and K now.
Work sucks. Am I right, Jay?
Yeah, Kay, it does. But luckily, the Fuck My Work Life podcast is here to help you through.
In this comedy podcast, we share memorable workplace stories through guests and listener submissions in the hopes of brightening your day, or at least leave you thinking, maybe you don't have it so bad after all.
Listen to Fuck My Work Life on your favorite podcast platform and follow us on all the socials at FMWL Pod.
Forced into early retirement by a degenerative illness, former baseball player Ray Waller, played by Wyatt Russell, moves into a new house with his wife Eve, played by Carrie Condon, and their 2 children. He hopes that the backyard swimming pool will be fun for the kids and provide physical therapy for himself. However, a dark secret from the home swimming pool soon unleashes an evil force that drags the family into the depth of inescapable terror in Night Swim.
When we all fall asleep, where do we go? Kiss me. No, he didn't. When we were fixing up the pool... Stop!
They said it hadn't been used in 15 years.
Maybe they weren't pool people. This is not for the kids.
I used to be scared of pools.
Cider! Come on, Cider!
Getting a vibe here. Do you have a boyfriend?
No. Hey, someone's coming over in a minute.
Keep your mouth shut.
Marco? You need to say something back. Ronan, Marco.
Why aren't you saying anything?
My kids have seen things, and I'm worried something is happening to my husband.
Dad?
I've been looking for you.
There has to be some way to stop this.
Marco.
Elliot!
Based on the 3-minute short film from director Ron Blackhurst and writer Bryce McGuire from 2014, in which original writer Bryce McGuire directs and pens this full-length adaptation. Now, when it comes to short films, over the last few years, I've judged them during film festivals, I've graded some, I've had some listeners sending in their short films with links for feedback. I have seen hundreds upon hundreds of short films over the years, and I have to say, I have a big respect for some of these filmmakers that attempt to craft a horror film with limited budget, limited screen time. Some of these horror movies give us such a good premise, and even bigger scares to some extent, than we get in full-length motion pictures. Some of these horror short films have such an emotional impact and a fantastic premise that they get turned into these full-length movies, such as Lights Out, Mama, The Babadook, Piggy, Smile, Even Dead, to even Saw. Now, some of these movies work, some are just meh, and some are just drawn out and try to bank on the mere premise of the original idea to generate scares. And it's so easy to separate a lot of these movies that work with a great premise and a great vision versus just a great premise with no vision. Some of these movies that have a solid premise and a foundation with filmmakers that had a mere vision in their head and asked themselves the question, if I had a bigger budget and longer screen time, I can do this. Those that love the premise of the short film but have no idea where to take the story, take the characters, or even how to generate scares after the single premise is presented on screen. This is where we see these generic horror stories, such as 2016's Lights Out and 2013's Mama. Now, these two films have a scarier short than they do full-length feature. These are the two I usually go to shine an example, because when we prolong the actual premise and scare factor, the film has nowhere else to go. The characters are usually boring, they're generic, and the climax is just forgettable. A lot of the horror short films, the biggest piece to it is that they have to end on a forte. They have to end with an impact. And a lot of these short films do that. They lead the viewer wanting more. When a horror short film goes to a full-length feature, the ones banking on the mere premise are the ones that become forgettable with a forgettable climax with no impact whatsoever and no memorable scares. Lights Out is one of those. Mama is one of those. And there's probably more, but those are the two that really are prominent in my mind when we talk about short film to full-length feature. Now, when it comes to Night Swim, 45 minutes into Night Swim, there is a lot of great lighting, fantastic sounds, and a build of tension of our inner fears to water that director Bryce McGuire creates that holds true to the short film in terms of style. But then something happens that solidifies the thought that Night Swim was destined for two things. One, to stay a short film, or two, could have been so much more under a better writer. I like to think of option two. The moment I knew Night Swim has hit a wall and planted his feet into yet another generic forgettable horror movie is when McGuire doesn't know where to take our characters. So he just places them in shots and a direction that seems like it's cut and pasted from hundreds upon hundreds of other horror movies before. A house with a history, a family in danger, a mystery to be solved. To the computer or library is where we go. To have filmmakers take the same shots of characters going through the same damn newspaper clippings, online searches, for a background on a house that is so uninteresting, to the point I think it would have been more entertaining to see the character's browser history instead of watching our characters go through up-close shots of headlines and photos that we barely see nor do we care about. That really doesn't add anything to the story. And of course, this research leads to an overhead shot of a car that's speeding down a highway to meet somebody that can shed some light on what's going on or somebody that can help our characters. This is the point. This is the point that disappointment set in, where once we get this type of scene and repetitive shots, it's rare for a movie to recover and redeem itself with something new or interesting to present. Even with this expectation that's set in, the film doesn't really tread water, but rather starts to sink with predictability, and an outcome that loses the build that we got from the first half of the movie. Director McGuire actually makes our threat feel unthreatening during the second half of the movie. Now, our performances from Wyatt Russell and Carrie Condon are just fine as individuals, but the writing to build the backstory of our characters feels thrown in and situational. McGuire just throws us into our family situation of a father that has an unfortunate illness, but adds no emotion or feels of hardship, which would have been a perfect opportunity to build the chemistry within our family. But the chemistry never comes, and that leads to a lack of caring what even happens to our family. The only thing McGuire banks on here is a gut-wrenching feeling of kids in peril. Whenever we see children in the pool with the idea of something that could happen to them, naturally we're going to have a sense of care or concern, which is a cheap shot by McGuire. Whenever we have an adult in the pool, there was not one moment that I felt concerned. McGuire attempts to go after the kids versus the adults because he doesn't have the skill to build that tension for us to really be concerned for the adults. This is what happens when you don't build a chemistry or invite the audience into this family relationship. We throw our family in a house and pool, and we're told why they're there, but we don't get the feeling of how this impacted their lives, how they feel, and how it leads to no emotional attachment or care. If our pool attacks our adult characters, I say go ahead. I don't care. Because the adult characters are just placed in to move a simplistic story along. McGuire would have been better suited keeping to one setting, focusing on a family in crisis and building a mystery and curiosity around this pool. Not feeling the need to explain it, but rather leave the idea of it on the table for the audience to ponder. I absolutely hate it when filmmakers do this. I hate it when filmmakers feel the need to spoon-feed the viewer simplistic explanations like we're morons to justify why something is haunted. Never have I had Wes Craven, John Carpenter, or Tobe Hooper sit me down as they teach me what's 2 + 2 for 2 fucking hours. The pool is haunted, we get it. Focus on that and leave the haunted damn pool a mystery. Water is always a trigger of fear or phobia of seclusion by itself. We don't need an added explanation, and McGuire turns this fear into something that feels like a fat guy in a kiddie pool with a hose and a beer. This is yet another prime example of filmmakers that love the premise, but have no idea or vision of what to do with it. Night Swim reaches its peak about the 45-minute to hour mark, which in fairness is a fantastic 45 minutes. The direction by McGuire within the first hour is on par here. along with one of my favorite pieces of Night Swim, which is the audio. Our audio Foley artist and audio mixer, Rosalind Shibasti and Audrey Stair-Kavosky, and our sound designer, PK Hooker, do an amazing job with the audio of this film. The direction here, alongside the sound mix from even a single driplet of water, placed at the right time, builds a feeling that made my body tense up as I anticipated what was about to happen. Even though I can see it coming, the environment that our filmmakers create keeps a foundation of building intensity from the technical side. Even though the story isn't anything new, it's a damn haunted house that moves into a pool. But I couldn't help but be in awe of the technical execution of how it was a prominent achievement in amplifying how this generic story was being told. It kept my attention waiting for the next driplet of water splash or echo that leaped into my ear. Night Swim is a great example of how important sound is in film. Not necessarily talking just music, but sound editing. Because without the achievements from our sound department here, the generic story and characters would have been dominant and the story would have been uninteresting. The downside to this, unfortunately, is that the sound was fantastic in the theater, but those without decent speakers at home may not really notice this. But I will be giving Night Swim another viewing at home to really see if the sound holds up to at least a decent level with home entertainment. Night Swim, when it comes to the 3-minute short film, it was a decent short film. It was well shot, it was stylish, but when it comes to the full-length movie, don't get me wrong, it still looks good, it's still a little bit stylish, and it sounds great, but it is as predictable as they come. This movie is as predictable as your neighbors that go skinny dipping in their backyard every Saturday at 8 p.m. Night Swim tries to tread water as long as it can with this story and premise, but at the end of the day, it just sinks. I'm giving Night Swim 2 stars. Now the time is finally here. Now playing on your respected podcast platforms and YouTube, the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and the Movie Wires crossover show is now live. And episode 2 just released Tuesday, where this week it's Antonio's From the Cult-Worthies pick, and we discussed 1978's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and Siskel and Ebert's review that followed. That episode is now live. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and review. The link to that episode will be in the description of this episode. Let's take a sneak peek to that episode now.
How familiar were you with this film when I put it on the list?
I've seen this movie numerous times. Every version of Body Snatchers I absolutely love. Any film that comes from a basis point of a creature feature from the 50s, I really appreciate, no matter how bad or mediocre or even brilliant it is.
I was raised with Donald Sutherland always on the TV. The one thing I have to say about this particular film is it really fits in with that whole conspiracy vibe of the 70s. Films like Parallax View, 3 Days of the Condor. This is kind of going towards the end of it, and it takes that good old-fashioned 70s paranoia and mixes it with the 1950s sci-fi classic.
To me, this doesn't feel like a studio movie because this one has a lot of elements from Kaufman that really differing from his other movies that I see on screen.
Your host Antonio of the Cult-Worthy Cinema Podcast and Justin Henson of the Movie Wire are here to take you back to the balcony.
Sound a little excited, Jane. Sound less excited, Roger.
The flight of a rugby team crashes on a glacier in the Andes. The few passengers who survive the crash find themselves in one of the world's toughest environments to survive in the Netflix original, Society of Snow.
Society of the Snow, it's a movie that explores life, and you cannot talk about life without talking about death. It's not afraid of getting into those dark places to find light, to find love. I was familiar with the story, but then in 2009, I read Society of the Snow, the book from Pablo Bierzi, and I realized that the story was bigger than what I thought it was.
Maestro.
And then I met the survivors, and after hours of interviews, I realized that what hasn't been told is that part of the experience of those who never had the chance to tell the story. When we told the survivors and the families of the victims, the idea, which was to play the story from a perspective that would put everybody on the same level of importance, not only the survivors, but also those who never came back, everybody was very supportive of the story, and their help was fundamental to us. I remember a beautiful line from the survivor. He said, "Reality it's not enough. Only fantasy can explain the story. So I believe that somehow through cinema, we can explain better the reality of what happened.
Now, Netflix Society of Snow is another inspired by true storytelling of the terrifying event that happened in 1972, just like what we saw in 1993's telling in the Frank Marshall film Alive. Now, both tellings of the story are based on two separate books, thus giving us two versions of the story that again leans heavy on the inspired by events, but the main focal point of how these surviving passengers managed to survive in the most horrific way possible. Directed by Jurassic World's J.A. Bayona, with an adapted screenplay by Bayona, along with Bernard Valaplana, Jaime Marquez, and Nicolas Casariego, those of us that know the story of Flight 71 or have seen the movie Alive or read the books know we anticipate two aspects of this story. The first is going to be the plane crash in the beginning, and then the last is going to be what the survivors' horrific decision is that they have to make to stay alive. It's what happens in between those two events that's really going to define this movie. Society of Snow does have a more challenging job to do, since a previous version already exists, and there's going to be a level of comparison that viewers are going to make. The original Alive starred Ethan Hawke, Vincent Spano, and Josh Hamilton, under the direction of Arachnophobia and Congo director Frank Marshall. And given Marshall's director style of creating an engaging, entertaining, character-driven spectacle, Society of Snow actually tells more of a subtle, straightforward story that feels more believable and actually uses Argentine and Uruguayan actors to tell this version. Now, I actually like 1993's Alive. I actually really did enjoy it. And when it comes to Society of Snow, there are things I did like about Alive in this movie, including Bayona's direction and the cinematography by Pedro Luque. One thing I really do like from Bayona's direction is he knows exactly how to get the right intimate shots to really put the viewer in the shoes of our characters. And we add that in with some incredible scenic shots that really captures the environment. Society of Snow was shot at the exact location of the crash site from 1972, and Luque and Bayona ensures that the location is completely taken advantage of by really taking the viewer on a tour of this location without it feeling forced or out of place, but almost really showing the image of seclusion by either Bayona's up-close shots or wide-angle shots. The camera work here is in top form. The technical aspects of the film really carries the movie along, but only for so far. When it comes to relying on our characters to drive this 2.5-hour movie, this is where I was detached from the film. And in no way is it the performances. The performances here are all fantastic. The camera work here is in top form. The technical aspects of the film really carries the movie along, but only for so far. When it comes to relying on our characters to drive this 2.5-hour movie, this is where I started becoming detached from the film. And in no way is it the performances. The performances here are all fantastic, especially Enzo Borigic and Augustine Porradilla, who play Numa and Nando, previously played by Ethan Hawke. The problem I had with Society of Snow is that the dialogue can just be way too straightforward, with a lot of the emotional elements trying to be captured solely based on the camera integration. There wasn't an emotional element to these characters that really kept me engaged into this story. We have a plane crash in the freezing cold, no food, we're in seclusion, and I didn't feel any sort of fear. I felt no emotion or trauma come from these characters. That came across believable. Now, Bayona could have been basing more of a focus on the traumatic events and relying on the characters to drive the hope messaging rather than just having our characters show the emotion of fear and sadness. But this is where the direction feels unbalanced of what he's trying to portray. Bayona seems to be distracted on capturing events on camera versus true, raw human emotion, and the dialogue is left stale, boring, and kept me looking at the time. Every time an actionable scene would transpire on screen, I could picture Bayona during filming clap his hands and say, "Okay, here we go, enough of this talking crap, look what I can do with the camera." And at times this does work, and yes, he does show off his skill capturing characters, scenes of peril, and faces of emotion. He does do this well, but when the characters actually speak, there is very little to really keep me engaged. It feels like the written material could have been cut down and the film should have been about 30 to 45 minutes shorter, because the dialogue slows down the pacing. The biggest disappointment I had was the fact I didn't feel like I took anything away from a 2.5-hour investment of time. If you don't know much about the events of Flight 571, then there might be some value here, but I think when it comes to Marshall's 1993 version, even even at times over-dramatized, but I think when it comes down to Frank Marshall's 1993 version, even at times Marshall's film can be a little over-dramatized. That at least got me to learn more about it after watching. It attempted me to research these events. Society of Snow takes this group of people that are together for a long duration of time, not even knowing their fate. And I feel like our writers avoid such conversation around our group. There's little feeling of strategy, little talks of each one's fears, little to no conflict between the group. In the 2 months this group was together, I would have loved to learn something of substance between the group. How they interacted, how were things decided. We have a perfect scene where we have a group of survivors stuck in the plane under the snow trapped. And this would have been a perfect opportunity to really dive into this group with conversational dialogue. Just with a mere attempt for me to feel something other than what happened by the situation. But the movie rushes through these moments, and to make up for the lack of emotion, the movie gives us narrated dates and dialogue, giving us dates, ages, and deaths. It almost comes across as almost a documentary that is trying to use filler words to meet a runtime. Society of Snow is a beautiful looking film, but when it comes to adding anything new of substance or knowledge, this is where it falls. Bayona nails the crash scene and does a better job at addressing the horrible moral decision of how these people survived, but at the same time, I was planning my own survival during the tragic middle of the movie, which consists of most of the 2.5-hour runtime. I'm giving Society of Snow 2.5 stars. And that's a cut on this week's edition of The Movie Wire. I want to thank you for listening and thank you for your support. You can also show support by following me on Instagram, Blue Sky, X, Thread, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Letterboxd at Movie Wire Show. Don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. And don't forget to listen, follow, and subscribe to our brand new show, Back to the Balcony. Until next week, do me a favor, make sure you stay for after the credits to show the respect to those that put their blood, sweat, and tears into making a feature film, and support your local movie theaters.
A verdict has been made on this episode of The Movie Wire by your host, Justin Henson. He thanks you for listening to the show. You can follow Justin on Instagram and Twitter at Movie Wire Show, or visit his website, www.themoviewire.com. Oh, and don't forget to leave a review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. Until next time, we will see you at the movies.
Thank you for bringing me to the movies.